Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're excited to have this conversation here with you today. Before we get started with our presentation, though, we would like to start with a very quick announcement. And Eric, I'll let you do the honors on that.
Okay, yeah, welcome everybody. So I'm Eric Kolderup. I'm a member of the ibpsa-usa conference committee, and really excited to announce that ibpsa-usa will be hosting SimBuild in Denver, Colorado next May 2024. Those who don't know the history, the ibpsa hosted SimBuild conferences from 2004 through to 2012 every other year. And then over the last decade or so, we've been partnering with ASHRAE. And this year, ibpsa-usa is once again hosting its own conference, SimBuild. So the important thing now is that a call for abstracts has just been announced. So this is for conference papers. As you see here on the slide, those abstracts will be due on August 7th. That's the deadline. And I believe that we'll be putting a link in the chat so that you can go to the website to find more about this conference. So, keep your eyes open for more information. I think this is going to be a really exciting event. Take it away, Dimitri.
Great, thank you, Eric. So during today's webinar, we're excited to share updates about the development of some new educational resources for BEM practitioners. My name is Dimitri Contianis. I'm an ibpsa-usa board member and the president of Model Efficiency, an energy modeling consulting firm specializing in research and development for BEM tools, workflows, and applications. Today, I'll be speaking about BEMcyclopedia, a DOE-sponsored project to develop a centralized collection of information about BEM, how it works, and how to apply it effectively to the design of buildings and their systems. Co-presenting with me is Eric Kolderup. And Eric, could you say a couple words to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm an energy modeler, and I've been involved with the BEPSA for a number of years as a board member and past president. So I've also been involved in the education committee, and we'll talk at the end of the presentation today briefly about some training materials that the committee is developing.
Okay. Great. So I'd like to begin this presentation by acknowledging all of the support for BEMcyclopedia thus far. Thanks to DOE and LBNL for their support and leadership on this project, and thanks to the technical support team as well. I've been leading this initiative with lots of technical content development support from ibpsa-usa, Kolderup Consulting, Guard Analytics, Sustainable IQ, and several others. I'd also like to thank our project's technical advisory group for their guidance, advice, and strategy, especially during the early stages of the project. We'll start the webinar by providing some background on the need for BEM education. And the main focus of the webinar will be to share updates on BEMcyclopedia and a demonstration of the website, so you can see how the educational content is presented and its scope. One of the really exciting things about BEMcyclopedia is that it's designed to be expanded in a collaborative way. So after the demonstration, I'll talk to you about how you can get involved in contributing your expertise to the BEM community. We'll then transition the webinar to talk about the work ibpsa-usa is doing to provide an excellent new training workshop on BEM fundamentals. So let's begin. A few years ago, ibpsa-usa led an extensive outreach effort to its members and the broader A&E community. The goal was to gather information through forums, one-on-one interviews, and surveys to learn how firms are using BEM, things that they do in common, but also unique practices. One of the questions that we posed during the interviews was, how did you learn BEM? And the key takeaway was that BEM is not commonly taught to undergraduate students, and learning on the job is very difficult. Training resources do exist, but they tend to have very specific focus, so a broad understanding is difficult to independently achieve. Therefore, the skill level can be highly variable from practitioner to practitioner. All of this insight pointed to the need for a more structured collection of educational information that is easily accessible, especially for practitioners early in their careers. And that led to the idea for BEMcyclopedia. BEMcyclopedia is an online hub for teaching practitioners how to effectively perform building energy modeling activities. The goal of BEMcyclopedia is to collect the BEM body of knowledge and make it easily accessible to practitioners. Content is presented in a wiki, which is a great format for creating a knowledge base. It's easy to create content, to link content, and have multiple collaborators working together. The seed content that currently exists on the website was created with the support of DOE by a group of industry experts, but the long-term goal is for the site to expand through crowdsourcing. And we'll come back to this and talk about this towards the end of the presentation. The BEMcyclopedia website is organized in 3 main areas called Essential BEM Concepts, Learn by Design Task, and an interactive data browsing tool. The Essential BEM Concepts section is a collection of fundamental information to provide a solid understanding of how buildings work, how building features and systems are represented in a model, how to provide inputs to the model, how to interpret results effectively. And the image on the left here is a screenshot of the website's navigation bar. And you can see the topics included in this section include topics such as Introduction to BEM, building science topics, an overview of different types of energy models, tutorials on how to prepare model inputs and analyze outputs, a primer on codes and standards that are relevant to energy modelers, resources on automation approaches, and other career resources as well. Now, while the Essential Concepts section provides a broad understanding of various aspects of BEM, the Learn by Design Task section, on the other hand, is highly focused on how to actually use BEM effectively throughout a design project. These tutorials are organized by the phases of a design project, and within each design phase, we've presented information about the types of design tasks that occur and design decisions that must be made. And we've described how BEM can be used to answer these specific questions. So rather than simply teaching how to prepare models, we are trying to help users understand how to apply the models to answer timely questions and have the greatest impact on a project. Finally, the third area of the website is an interactive tool to help make meaningful assumptions for input data during early stage projects. We've created a couple of these lookup data tools that we'll share momentarily during the website demo. So let's do that. Let's take a look. All right, so now you see the BEMcyclopedia website, and the URL is simply BEMcyclopedia.com. The landing page here has some general information about the project, but really, we're going to focus the bulk of our attention here on the wiki portion of the website. So, as I showed you in the previous slides, there's 2 kind of main content areas: Learn by Design Task and Essential BEM Concepts. We're going to start here on the Essential BEM Concepts side. You can see clicking on this topic brings you to the sort of browsing navigation menu where we have the main topic areas, and you can kind of expand on each one of these things. And you can see a sort of menu of all the different pages that exist in each of these tutorial category areas. The other thing you can do is just click on the heading of each topic area, and it'll bring you to a page where you can see more information about content that's available here. So I'm going to show you a bunch of pages here. It's going to be kind of a whirlwind tour. The idea is to sort of give you a sense of the breadth and depth of the content here. And then, when I've concluded the demo, I'll pause and, allow you folks to ask questions. But if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box of the webinar. This first section here, Introduction to BEM, is really for people who are new to energy modeling. If you are just learning about the topic, you can start here and get some very introductory information. So, what are you doing when you create a model? This kind of gives you a sense of the various aspects of, taking a building design and describing its input characteristics, setting the weather data, running the simulation software, and extracting useful results. So this is really the very highest level overview of what energy modeling is all about. Why do we do building energy modeling? This gives us a rundown of many of the common modeling use cases. So we can use modeling for code compliance and green building certification, research activities, developing policy, and design assistance and optimizing the performance of a building. So there's some narratives describing these different use cases. This next page here, what information is contained in a building energy model? This kind of gives you an overview of the types of data that we use to populate our model. How is the geometry represented? how do we represent building envelope constructions, whether they be opaque or window glazed constructions. And you can kind of see it going on down the list here, breaks down this information. There's a lot of graphical illustrations to help to illustrate these concepts as well. Some of the other pages that are in this introductory section are information about how simulation engines work, what types of results are produced, how a model might evolve over the course of a project, and also a discussion about a BEM practitioner's role and how they fit within a project team. The next section I'll talk about here is the building science concepts area. So here we try to provide some information about the underlying building physics. How do buildings actually work? It's really important to understand what should be going on before you try to represent it in a model. So this helps to raise a modeler's baseline understanding of building science concepts. So you can see there are some pages here with basics of internal gains. What are the main internal gains in a space, and how does that heat transfer, work its way into the building, and then need to be conditioned by the building systems. So again, detailed narratives and illustrations of the concepts as well are included here. Another page I'll point out here is this fundamentals of HVAC. As many of us are well aware, HVAC modeling is often one of the more challenging aspects for practitioners early in their careers, but also, throughout your career. This tends to be one of the trickiest things to represent in a model. So this section aims to help build the understanding of not just how to model systems, but how they are designed, operated, and the physics associated with heating and cooling. So we talk about, why do we need HVAC systems? What is the science? Like, how do they actually condition the air? There's some design concepts that are called out here, things that are important to understand because, ultimately our job as modelers is to represent these designs within the simulation tools. In addition to this fundamentals, we also have some very detailed information about specific HVAC system types. This page is evolving and being added to currently, but you can see we have some pretty detailed information about specific system types. So this one talks about variable air volume systems. And a lot of these detailed HVAC system pages are organized in a very consistent way where we describe, how the system works, what information is needed for the model, some common design measures, things you can do to make them more efficient, different control options, what are some common applications when you might actually use this system versus another type. And then, as we kind of get down into more of the weeds, there's some discussion about checking the model output results to ensure that they are simulating the system effectively. I'll also point out, if you scroll to the bottom of this page, and really most of the pages on this website, what we've done is, for additional reading, we've created a series of links for additional resources. So here we're linking to various other things where you can learn more about this VAV system in this particular example. And also references. We've tried to do a really good job in citing our sources so that you can understand where the information on these pages is coming from. And again, look to those resources for additional information if you wish to read more about them. So this is, these two sections are pretty common across most of the pages on BEMcyclopedia. So, this was the VAV system example, but again, there are other system types represented as well, like heat pumps and dedicated outside air systems, and many more to come. All right, so next thing I'll show you is this section on different model types. Here we give you an overview of different simulation model types that are commonly used. And so we have some discussion about prototype models, simple box models, shoebox models, and currently evolving some information about detailed models as well. So, since much of the work on the other side of the site, the Learn by Design task area of the site, which I'll be talking about next, most of it that has been developed thus far has focused on early phases of design. And because of that, the simple box model is featured in many of those tutorials because these simple models are extremely valuable for early stage design studies. So we actually really expanded out the page on simple box models quite a bit. And you can see we have in the contents, there's discussion on use cases for simple box models, when it's appropriate to use them, what information is coming from different members of the design team, as well as the modeling approach. There's also this great introductory video that ibpsa-usa developed to support this topic of how to create simple box models. So I definitely welcome you to check that out. It's available here and also on ibpsa-usa's YouTube page. Part of the tutorial information for simple box models, quite a bit of it was focused on how to actually prepare those model inputs effectively. So I'll show you the preparing model inputs area, where we have essentially broken down different types of input data and created tutorials specific to inputting different categories of input data. So this first one here is, how do you define the building geometry? And there's some discussion on thermal zoning approaches, as well as, a number of different concepts and techniques for simplifying the building geometry for early stage analysis and simple box models. So you can see that there's some examples of simplifying the windows, simplifying shading design, simplifying roof, and other geometry simplifications. Some other pages I'll quickly show you here. There's this one, how to define opaque envelope constructions. Again, this is another tutorial-based page, which guides you through different approaches for how to prepare these inputs, and has some discussion on recommended approaches as well. So you can see there's a discussion on simple input approach, which you simply input a U factor or an R value, or a more detailed layer by layer input approach that captures things like thermal mass of different construction layers. How do we account for thermal bridging in composite constructions, like a cavity insulation type of construction? So again, quite a bit of information here, and I certainly welcome you to peruse it at your leisure. Some of the other things I'd like to highlight under the essential BEM concepts, and again, it's all navigatable here by these sidebars. There's a section on analyzing model outputs. There's a page about codes and standards, and this lists a bunch of codes that energy modelers should be aware of, because they often have an impact on how you can, or what you must do when modeling a building for code compliance. But also, they provide a lot of useful information on making good assumptions for early models. So this page is broken into different categories of codes. So building codes, energy codes, codes that are very specific to energy modeling, ventilation codes and standards, all of which have a bearing on how you create your energy models. A couple other things that are available in the essential BEM concept section is there's an area on automation and scripting, which has a list of resources that provide guidance on how to automate things that are either laborious or repetitive when you're creating your energy models. There's also a section on education and career resources, which has more educational content for students and early career practitioners about aspects of becoming a BEM practicing professional. That's a good tongue twister. So now I'm going to transition and show you some of the content that is available on the Learn by Design task section. So again, if we start with the overview, we're presented with this menu, which has at the heading level the different design phases in a typical design project. And we can expand on any of these, and it kind of gives us this layered set of information. And each of these headings, site analysis, energy code and program analysis, and so forth, these represent things that the design team typically does during this phase. They're not necessarily energy modeling specific activities, but they are common to most design projects. But when we drill down to the next level, these bullet points are things that you as an energy modeling professional can do to assist the design team with this sort of bigger picture goal. So if we click on the pre-design page, each of these design phase pages starts with a brief introduction to well, what is pre-design? What is actually happening, and what is the team attempting to accomplish? And then we begin to provide some additional information on the specific design tasks. So what is site analysis? Well, it's the study of climatic, geographical, and so forth information specific to the site. So then we as BEM practitioners can perform a number of very targeted tasks and studies to assist the design team with their analysis or with whatever their design goal is. So looking at site analysis, the design team needs to understand the energy impacts of siting the building. And we can provide some studies that look at how terrain and elevation impact performance of the building, surrounding buildings and vegetation, and what sort of wind and solar impacts that may have. Are there design constraints? Are there buildings on either side that limit the sort of degrees of freedom we have to do things like orient the building effectively? So we provide some introductory information on topics like that. Looking here at the energy code and program analysis, early on in the project, it's really important to understand which energy codes apply to your project, and whether a project intends to participate in any beyond code programs or efficiency programs or incentive programs. So things we can do here are we can help to look up the applicable energy code. And here we provide some links to a DOE website that can tell you exactly which energy code is in effect in your particular location. And we also have some discussion on why this information is relevant to you, the BEM practitioner. Here we sort of break down the difference between prescriptive and performance paths for code compliance, how mandatory code requirements apply under both of those performance approaches, and then have some discussion about how different modeling rules may apply to different projects, depending on which version of the code is in effect in a particular project location. You can see here, there's some discussion on some of the primary modeling rules you're likely to run across when you're doing code compliance modeling. Another thing I'll highlight here is, oftentimes early on in a project, it's becoming more and more common, is a design team will try to set a performance target. And that may be in terms of energy performance or carbon performance or, cost performance, utility cost performance. And it's really important to understand what's a realistically achievable target. So we have this page here that gives some guidance on how to research performance benchmarks. And here we've identified a number of different benchmarking tools. We provided some guidance on how to use them, as well as some information about what sort of metrics they will help you to understand. So there's quite a few different alternatives here. We try to give you some guidance on when you might wish to choose one versus another. So those are a couple of highlights from the pre-design phase. I'll now toggle over to show you some information in the conceptual design phase. So again, we start by talking about what is conceptual design, what are we actually trying to accomplish during that design phase. And then, some of the activities that the design team usually is working on during the conceptual design phase include things like having a kickoff with the design team, analyzing things like the building's form and mass, beginning to select specific design features, and also, assessing the performance as these design concepts are being chosen. So here, there's some information about during a design kickoff. One of the things that often happens is a design charrette. So, we have some information about, what types of analysis can be done before, during, and after the charrette. There's a lot of different modeling tasks that can occur, some of which it's good to prepare in advance, some of which is likely to occur after the meeting, but there are also some quick studies that can be done during the charrette itself. A very common activity for energy modelers during conceptual design is to help the architects to understand the relative performance of different massing options. So there's this tutorial that helps us to understand what some of the impacts may be related to different massing decisions. It gives us some guidance on how you may wish to put a study like this together, as well as how you might present the results of comparing different massing approaches. And then, beyond the sort of big picture form and mass, we begin to work with the architecture and engineering teams to help them evaluate different design features, really key big picture decisions about the design. So, we can see there's this page related to different construction materials and how thermal mass might impact the building performance. and how we may also wish to present these results as well. Different glazing options and how that might impact the building's energy performance and daylight performance. And then, also other things like comparing HVAC system alternatives and assessing whether a design is, it's feasible for natural ventilation to provide either free cooling or, natural ventilation of outdoor air. And you can see there's various other things that are encompassed here as well. So then finally, I'll show you a quick example of some work in progress. We're currently working on fleshing out this schematic design section as well. So the content that we're beginning to develop here talks about the different architectural and engineering design activities that occur during schematic design. So here we progress those design concepts that we began to evaluate during conceptual design. The architects begin to develop preliminary floor plans, and there's a number of different impacts in terms of building performance that are resultant on different floor plan layout decisions. So we intend to sort of tackle those topics. Under the engineering design activities, we'll have a pretty lengthy discussion of load reduction modeling approaches and comparing different system types and beginning to really drill down into how to design a system effectively, how to zone it effectively, and other topics of that nature. Okay, so then the last thing I'd like to show you is the third main area of the website, which is this interactive lookup table data. So here you can see this page talks about the two different types of lookup data that we've created here. And essentially, the goal of this is to help you to understand what are reasonable assumptions to make in an energy model for early phase analysis. If you are in design development or construction documents phase, the design is pretty well defined. You know exactly how many lighting fixtures are in each space. You know exactly how the systems are laid out. The schedules, hopefully, how the owner intends to use the building. However, in the early phases, a lot of that information is still in flux. So it's important to make reasonable assumptions. And there's a number of data sources out there, and what we try to do is compile them into a easily accessible tool. And I'm going to show you these two. So the first is an internal gains lookup table. And you can see this is essentially a tabular presentation of different modeling assumptions for different building types, and within each building type, various space types. So, just to kind of give you an example of how you might use this, perhaps we're interested in understanding internal gains in a medium office. If we select that building type, we'll kind of filter down the long list to just this building type, call out the space types that are common within a medium office, and then present us with things like lighting power density, equipment power density, and occupant density. And there are other data points available up here as well. So, perhaps, one thing that we might be interested in understanding, if you're a codes and standards junkie like me, we might want to understand how has lighting power density evolved over, the course of time, as the building codes are updated. So what we can do is select that data point, select all of these vintages here from the list, and here we can kind of track the progression of lighting power standards, starting from very high pre-1980, working down to much, much lower here under the latest version of ASHRAE 90.1. We can really track that progression effectively. Another example here is for this, again, this medium office building. Maybe we wish to understand for each space type, what the schedules are associated with this lighting power density. So if we, layer on this lighting schedule, we can see that, the lighting schedule is this thing called Office Medium Building Light Schedule. And if we click on it, it will bring us over to the other lookup table data. This is now, we're looking at the schedule data. Schedule data is presented in both tabular and graphical form. So we can see, hourly load fractions for this lighting power schedule, in the table, and also presented in this chart. Perhaps we want to filter this down. Maybe we're only interested in the operational schedules and not the design schedules. So there's some additional filters we can overlay here. We can remove some of these data points, and that'll, kind of drill us down to just the weekday and weekend schedules. So we can see this one as a little bit of a cleaner presentation. And in addition to just looking at one type of schedule, we can also overlay multiple schedules. So I'll stick with the medium office example, and I will select here now a lighting, equipment, and occupancy schedule. And now we see, this data table has grown quite a bit. There's a lot of different data points for each of these schedule types, and a pretty gnarly looking schedule chart, which has all of this information overlaid. Again, so we can filter this down if, we want to kind of see a cleaner presentation. So, rather than looking at all of these, maybe we're just interested in the weekday schedule. So now we can see we just have the weekday operational schedules for lighting, equipment, and occupancy. And the nice thing about these tables too is if you want to see specifically what these values are, rather than trying to look up here and then look back down here, if you hover over any of these data points, it will tell us, okay, this red line is the occupancy schedule, and here in the 8th hour of the day on weekdays, we're at 20% occupancy. We are at 26% lighting power, and we are at 38% equipment power. So, a lot of information presented here in a way where we can kind of drill down to what we are most interested in. Okay, so at this point, I am going to toggle back to the presentation. I hope the demonstration was informative, and to give you a sense of where we are at so far in terms of progress. So far, we've created over 75 tutorials and over 125 graphics to support the tutorial content. The Learn by Design task tutorial development has focused on the early stages of design, and the Essential BEM Concepts tutorials cover a range of introductory topics across several areas. The interactive data section, as I just showed you, includes a large quantity of data sources for internal gains in schedule data. Looking ahead, we're currently working on fleshing out the schematic design phase section, more detailed HVAC system tutorials, and adding new content related to decarbonization and several other building science topics. But for BEMcyclopedia to really take off, we need your help. And this is one of my primary goals here in today's presentation is to reach out to the BEM community and welcome you to become contributors to BEMcyclopedia. It's very easy to get started. All you need to do is create an account by clicking the link at the top of any of the pages on the wiki. Create an account, send an email to us, and we'll grant you editing rights. And really, no contribution is too big or too small. So, I recommend start by finding a page that's interesting to you and read it. And if you feel the content needs some tweaking, then feel free to tweak it. This is a wiki like Wikipedia. It's driven by the readers and volunteers to help, make the information as good and detailed as possible. If you feel like more detail could be helpful on any page, go ahead, add some detail. If you feel that another section of a page could add value or help to address a specific concept that hasn't been covered yet, then go ahead and add a new section to a page. And if you feel especially motivated and want to create an entirely new page to discuss a topic not currently addressed on the site, then go for it. We have a tutorial with very detailed guidance on how to edit a page on the wiki, which I will show you really quickly. That's accessible from the help section of our wiki navigation bar here on the side. So see under help, it says how to contribute to BEMcyclopedia. We click on it, then there's this detailed guide that talks about who can contribute, gives you some sort of guidelines like trying to maintain software neutrality. We don't want this to be something that tells you how to use one particular tool, but really teaches you concepts related to energy modeling more generally. And then, we have some guidance on how the site is organized and how to create content that fits neatly within the organization of the website. And then, the bulk of the tutorial information is giving you guidance on how to edit pages. Built within the wiki website, the underlying software is a really powerful editor. It's, like it's comparable to typing something up in Microsoft Word, but we do provide guidance on how you can, create sections, create text, change formatting, add images, and so forth. All of this can be done right in a browser. You don't need to install any special software. So there's very minimal barrier to entry here. Once you've created your account, you can be up and running really quickly. But definitely, spend some time taking a peek at this page to help you understand how to be most effective. At the end of the tutorial, we also give you some kind of tips, best practices on creating pages for each of the kind of main categories of content. So definitely pay some attention to those sections if you choose to be a contributor, and I hope you do. So that concludes the BEMcyclopedia overview. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I've included the BEMcyclopedia account setup email here again for when you create your account and want to get editing access. So please do set up an account. It really only takes a second, and you will not be added to any email lists or anything like that. It's really, the account is to give you access to be a contributor, and that's the main and only reason he'll ask you to set up an account. So thank you so much for your time. I'd like to pause for some questions, and also want to make sure we save some time for Eric to discuss the ibpsa-usa training workshop. So thanks.
Yeah, so we do. This is Eric again. We do have a few questions that have come in. Do you want me to tee some of those up, Dimitri?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. I've not been looking at the Q&A yet.
Well, so the first one is from Mohammed, and he's aiming to apply and pass the BEMP certificate. That's the Building Energy Modeling Professional certification from ASHRAE. And his background's in mechanical engineering, and he's a lead AP emphasizing construction field with no experience in BEM. So what is the roadmap you should follow to gain experience in BEM and software tools? So this isn't necessarily specifically about BEMcyclopedia, but kind of generally somebody coming new to building energy modeling, thoughts on how they might approach that?
Yeah, I would definitely, start by reading the introductory content here, the intro to BEM section. That's a good place to sort of get your feet wet. And, there are other resources out there specifically for BEMP certification. ASHRAE has a guidance document that they've published that it's kind of like a study guide for BEMP, where they give you some information, also point you to other resources that are very tailored to information that you're likely to find on the BEMP exam. I think that what the content that we're developing here on BEMcyclopedia is absolutely relevant to types of information that may show up on the BEMP exam as well. And what Eric will be talking about next, it would be another great resource for people who are looking to get experience with energy modeling.
So then there was actually a couple of people had a question related to basically sort of who's written this. So Garab asked, could you tell me if there's a BEM community that aggregated the information? Molly was also interested more about the contributors and how information will continue to be added, which you've somewhat addressed.
Yeah, in the very beginning, I called out some of the key collaborators and contributors. Thus far it's been a relatively small group, but the purpose of this webinar and other activities we'll be doing this year is to spread the word that this exists and to solicit contributions from the broader BEM community. Nobody knows it all, and collectively we know quite a bit. So my hope is that people will sign up for an account, get started on contributing, and together we can make this a really powerful source of information. Eric, are you still on? Did we lose you?
Oh, sorry. So we do have another question from Garab about, is there a section for energy modeling to achieve LEED certification?
So, thus far, a lot of the content developed has been focused on early stage analysis. The LEED modeling, to me, represents more of a detailed phase analysis. That said, studies are often done early on to at least gauge, how many LEED credits might we achieve. That is absolutely something we hope to get on the site over time. It's not something we've covered explicitly yet. But if that's something you're interested in contributing, then, we welcome your contributions.
And then Justin had asked about the sort of the framework here. Can tags be added to headers on pages to link directly to them with the URL?
They absolutely can, and I'll show you really quickly how that works. So, here in the table of contents, let's say we wanted to link to this editing pages. If we click on it, just like, many URL pages, there's this hash sign, and then the header shows up next to it. So now if we copy this URL, it will bring you right to this spot in the page. And that works for any page. Anything that has a header, a section header, you can link directly to it using that approach. And also within wiki pages, if you wanted to have a wiki link that links to a header section, you can do that as well.
So then there's another important question from Mohammed. Is someone verifying the edit information? So if somebody, does make changes to the page, how do we make sure it's reasonable information?
Yeah, and that's a great question. This is something that we talked to our technical advisory group about in the early phases of the project. And there's a number of different ways to do that. One is for an administrator to review changes as they come in. Two is to have a sort of a group of people who coordinate and review all the changes together collectively. There is a way to actually stage edits on the wiki where they do not become live until somebody has reviewed them and explicitly approved them. I've had a number of discussions with other folks who run wiki sites, and they've strongly discouraged doing that because the thought is that if people don't get instant gratification that their edits are on the site, then it will discourage them from making future edits. So we've kind of chosen to allow editing to happen, by anyone who's given access. We do have this process in place where you need to explicitly request access to become an editor, like I told you about, by setting up an account and then sending us an email. That at least, keeps the spam bots at bay. But I think over time, if we have a larger number of contributors, it may become difficult to review each and every change. So we'll have to decide whether to have sort of a community process where many people have cast their eyes on things, or whether to enable something like the staging of edits if we feel like things are getting out of hand. Thus far, folks who've been contributing, I think, have all been doing a great job of researching the content, citing their sources, and ensuring that the content is reasonable. You'll see as you navigate through the page through the website that some pages are very detailed, others are lighter touch, and those lighter touch ones may be areas that contributors can add value to by looking at and adding new sections and new content. So I hope that answered the question. That's a long-winded response.
So another question about from Garab. Do you know how well BEMcyclopedia is relevant to BEM for projects in Scandinavia?
So the content, it tries to be about energy modeling and building science. So I think it's quite relevant regardless of where you're located. It's not really content geared towards how to model a project in California or how to model a project in Florida. It's really how to represent different design features and system types within an energy model. So I think it's broadly applicable.
And then so probably maybe a good idea. Molly had asked about section could be added that it's a suggestion box where users can request additional information on certain topics, like I suppose either ones that they know should be added or questions that they have that they'd like answered.
I think it's a great idea. In fact, it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately is, how do we prioritize developing content? So I think I'll take that and maybe add a link to a Survey Monkey or Google form kind of thing where we can have people submit suggestions. I would also note that if there's a particular topic that you are knowledgeable about, rather than suggesting that someone add content, just go ahead, add some content. But some combination of the two, I think, is a good idea.
So we still have some more questions. So the Mohammed asked, can BEMcyclopedia will eventually have a tool to compare the effect of modeling input, like mechanical inputs or architectural inputs, on the building or mechanical equipment energy usage?
I don't think that's necessarily the scope of this website. That to me points to energy modeling simulation tools, but I think that we can help users understand how to get that information effectively with the type of content that we're providing on BEMcyclopedia.
Let me see. We've got a couple more, one in Q&A and a few in the chat. So Mohammed asked, is there...
Let's take a couple more, and then Eric, I want to make sure I leave you some time as well.
Sure. So is there dedicated courses provided by ibpsa-usa to pass BEMP? The BEMP exam, in other words. I mean, I guess I could answer that too. I'd say the answer is partially. So the BEM training workshop that I'll be talking about in a minute does include quite a bit of information that's relevant for the BEMP exam, but it doesn't include everything. As you may know, ASHRAE has a study guide that lists the topics that are addressed by the exam, and some of those are not really covered. So currently, I guess I'd say it's a partial solution. I guess a comment from Leah that would be great if the lookup tables can include more sources like Title 24, et cetera. Is that being considered to add more?
Everything is being considered. I'm not sure when we'll get to it, but I think it's a great idea. It's definitely something we've thought of. So I can take that back to my team, and we'll get back to you on that.
And then one other in the chat, another kind of high-level question. What are your thoughts on developing tool-specific resources, within BEMcyclopedia? Yeah,
that's something we've kind of thought about quite a bit, and I guess my initial reaction, I'd be curious to hear others' thoughts though, is that software vendors provide really excellent training on how to use their tools, what their inputs mean, how to operate the tools, how to effectively, use all the different output options within the tools. I think that currently the approach with BEMcyclopedia has been to support that type of training by giving people better guidance on how to use any tool most effectively, and what are all the different touch points you can make throughout a project to really make an impact as an energy modeler. So, rather than saying, here's how to do this in tool 1, here's how to do it in tool 2, we provide guidance on, how to put together an effective energy modeling study. And then, we would expect that you would supplement that information with training from the vendor of the tool that you choose to use.
Okay, I think that sort of answers a question from William in chat about whether there's a specific energy modeling program that the information in BEMcyclopedia was built around. And I think, as you're saying, the idea is it's sort of how and what to use a tool for, not how to use a specific tool.
Yeah, and we try to be software neutral to the extent possible. There are definitely some instances where if two different engines represent things in very different ways, without necessarily calling out the name of the software, you can say, some tools do X, some tools do Y. So it's important to understand the differences. Okay, well, I think at this point, Eric, I'd like to turn it over to you. I know there are probably some unanswered questions, and maybe we can answer those offline. But we're kind of getting short on time, and I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to talk about the BEM training workshop.
Sure. Yeah, so maybe go to the next slide, please. So a little history, some of you may know, I know that there's maybe one or two instructors who are who've presented this training here on the webinar right now. But back in 2010, the ibpsa-usa Education Committee commissioned a development of a full-day workshop. Rocky Mountain Institute was selected as the vendor to put this together. The idea was that it was a tool agnostic training on best practices and applications. So the committee felt there was a gap in terms of training resources. As Dimitri mentioned, the vendors provide training on how to use their specific tools and often for some applications, but sort of the best practices, nobody was necessarily providing a comprehensive best practices approach to training. So this workshop has been presented many times. Don't know the exact number, but over 1,000 people over the years have attended. And much of it has been presented in partnership with ASHRAE through their ASHRAE Learning Institute. So there have been workshops held at ASHRAE conferences and also online through the ASHRAE Learning Institute. And the topics there on the lower right are the main topics that were originally covered: fundamentals, best practices, modeling to inform design. In other words, how to use it throughout the life cycle of a project design or design project, life cycle cost analysis, and then some on calibration and M&V, so modeling of existing buildings. So that's the history. The next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
So then last year, ibpsa-usa started on commissioned an update. So the first, say, 3 hours of the workshop has been updated, and that was done by a team led by me and some others. The outline of that first phase includes an overview of energy modeling and then an early design project example. So trying to provide a sort of comprehensive case study about how modeling was used during early design, something on ASHRAE standard 209 and how that might apply to your project, and then a little bit on accuracy and uncertainty on modeling, which is important for people to understand. And then within that overview of energy modeling, a lot of basically trying to ask these questions. What are you doing when you create a model? Why do it? What information is contained in BEM? And as some of the information from this training was used to help populate some of those topics that Dimitri was showing in BEMcyclopedia. So there's a link between this training and the BEMcyclopedia content in some cases. And then phase 2, so this is something that is just getting going, the second half of this training, which will focus a little bit more on detailed HVAC system modeling comparison, existing building retrofit, so calibrating models, using models to help identify improvements to existing buildings, and then there'll be more topics determined soon. So that's the basic idea. I guess one more slide just provides some examples, trying to make the information as visual as possible to help explain some of these concepts. And so some of these images you also saw are helping to inform BEMcyclopedia. Now, the obvious question would be, or maybe you might have a question, well, where do I get this training, or where can I find this training? And that is being still worked out. So the training will most likely still be offered through the Ashley Learning Institute. So keep your eyes open for that. And then also just keep your eyes open for, further announcements about where you might attend workshops or view these materials. So then one last slide. If you've got any questions about this, if you're interested in learning more or providing some input on this, please don't hesitate to contact me or the ibpsa-usa Education Committee. If you're, also interested in getting involved in helping to, identify education needs and put on programs like this webinar today is sponsored by the ibpsa-usa Education Committee. So consider maybe participating there too. So I think I'll pause there. I know we've only got another 2 minutes to see if there's any quick questions before we wrap up today's webinar.
I am not seeing, oh wait, here we go. There's some coming in now.
Right, so Mohammed asked, this training is not available now. It's not at this very moment, right? So a workshop presentation has not been set up, and sort of like a recording is not available. So please, that'll probably be announced in the ibpsa-usa communications, such as the newsletter, when that has been determined. But if you have thoughts on when and where we should be doing this, don't hesitate to get in touch. And then either for fees or otherwise. So that's another question. So traditionally, or so far, this has been a for-fee training through the Ashley Learning Institute. So you could sign up online. And that's what we're working out now, how to move forward with it. Good question, though. And then see Nicholas. So will there be any seminars or training on these topics happening at the ASHRAE Topical Conference this September? So this workshop is not, there aren't plans to be offering this workshop at that point. I think Dimitri is doing a talk about BEMcyclopedia, which you might direct people to if they're interested.
Yeah, that's currently scheduled for the first day of the conference, I believe. So hope to see some of you there. I think sorry, go ahead. I think let's take this as the last question, but I think we're just about out of time now.
Yes, right. So are training materials from past workshops available either for fees or otherwise? That's also a good question. There is a place where I think the very early training materials are available online. I unfortunately don't have the URL right now, but if there's there's an old wiki called BEMbook, BEMBOOK, BEMbook wiki that's not actively maintained. You might be able to search and find that and find some links to some of the earlier slides. But we definitely want to try to make this information all more widely available. So yeah, Dimitri, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, just wrapping things up. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for taking the time to attend this today. Really appreciate all the feedback and great questions. And, I'll just make one last request, set up an account for BEMcyclopedia and, join the party. And thanks again. Talk to you all very soon.